This is the last video, and I'm going to attempt to pull the various parts together. So the starting point is very obviously, why can't very well qualified graduates, often working for large firms of consulting engineers, solve these problems? Because when I run the training course, Understanding Structural Behaviour, I always start it with a test. And when these ideas were fresh, and we're going now back 50 years, and I was discussing them with Peter Dunnican, who was the then managing director of the Arab Partnership, I showed him the test and I said, would your graduates be able to solve them? And he looked at me as if I was crazy. He said, what are you talking about? He said, these problems are trivial, and that's the point. They do look trivial. Very simple, two-dimensional frames, many of them statically determinate. Why can't they solve them? Well, the most obvious explanation is that they haven't been taught to solve them. Now, I gave the results of the Arab tests in a paper in 1976, and in 2009 the Institution of Structural Engineers woke up to the significance of those tests and started a proactive attempt to improve the teaching in UK universities. But I have to say, on the basis of the test, there isn't very much sign of the effectiveness of that. There's also my textbook, Understanding Structural Analysis, the first 5 chapters of which addresses this understanding. So what is the problem? Why can't they solve them? Well, it's difficult to be specific because you'd have to do a survey of universities and so on. But after the first results were published, I did talk to a few academic colleagues, and their view was, when I asked why they couldn't solve these problems, they said, well, no, we know they can't, but once they get into the design office, they'll learn to do it. And that was absolutely substantially true, because at that time the methods of analysis were extremely limited, and so that threw enormous importance onto understanding the behavior of the structure. And then, of course, in the 1990s, we had the first stable version of Windows 3.1, and then everybody jumped into that. I was a software developer at the time. And so everybody, shortly after that, had a desktop computer with the most powerful software available. And so overnight, everybody became the greatest analyst. And the great risk now is that young engineers use the computer as an alternative to understanding. But still, why can't they solve them? I do know that there are a number of universities who are teaching my system, because I can tell from the sale of the textbooks. It appears to be the flavour of the month at some Middle Eastern universities. But the real problem is this: there is nothing new in my method. They all know what Benny moments are and so on. The difference is that the solution is not linear. And they have been used in their undergraduate study to be given an algorithm which solves a particular problem, and if you get the data right at the start, the sequence through the solution is predictable and you get the right answer. In my questions, you don't know where to start. You can start with simple beams with a deflected shape, but that doesn't always give you the answer. And so what you have to do is to go almost in circles around the problem until you find a solution which matches each part, and that's very important, so that you have a solution for the deflected shape, reactions, and Benny moment diagram. And I've yet to see any solution that was correct internally, but was actually incorrect. So it's a powerful method, it works. But when I'm running the course and they're starting to understand what I want them to do, and obviously I give them a series of practice problems, the most obvious thing is they end up with a patently incorrect solution, but they don't know what to do next. So it's almost as though they're not accustomed to the idea of an insecure result that needs testing. And I think one of the reasons why the employers who get me to run these courses like the approach is that that exactly mimics real structural design. We don't know anything when we start the design. We have to go around in circles until we find a solution which satisfies the client and all the other engineering criteria. But there is another reason why this is difficult to integrate into a traditional undergraduate course as method. And that is because they are used in all the other topics covered to be given a linear, predictable algorithm and know that if they get the right data in, they'll get the right answer. Whereas with my problems, you don't know where to start. You know what the constituents of the solution are, but you have to keep going round until you find a solution which matches, and that takes practice. And that doesn't fit in terribly well into undergraduate study. The analogy I give is that you go to university to learn to ride a bicycle, and so they teach you all about cogs and wheels and friction between metal and rubber and strength of the tubes and so on. And at the end of the course you go out, you get your certificate, and they give you a bike. You get on the bike and you fall off. That's what this method is about. It's about learning how to practice to find the correct solution. In 1642, Galileo was under house arrest, having challenged the prevailing view of the scientific committee of the Catholic Church that the universe went round the earth, a view that had pertained for thousands of years. He was supporting the views of Copernicus and Kepler, who fell out of bed one day and said, "No, you got it all wrong. It goes around the sun." Now that is taken as an example by Thomas Kuhn, who in his book, The Structure of Scientific Revolutions, explains that scientific change occurs abruptly. Prior to that time, the scientific view was that it was linear and slow. He defined this as a paradigm shift, and we have just been through one ourselves. Because prior to 1990, all calculations were carried out by hand, and within a very short period of time, all detailed analysis calculations are carried out by the computer. And that should have required a root and branch review of what is taught in structural analysis and structural design in order to meet this new design office, where methods of analysis like virtual work, strain energy, flexibility, stiffness are never carried out by hand in the design office. The one method, stiffness, is integrated into the computer software, but you don't ever carry it out by hand. So why do you need it? Well, I have had this discussion with academics over the years, and when I show them the results of the tests and say, why can't your graduates solve these problems? Their answer is, well, we have to teach them the fundamentals. Well, if that's the case, I don't think the fundamentals are working terribly well if they can't solve a loaded cantilever. And so this is not really about a serious review of the change that's required, because the aphorism applies here, and that is that it's easier to move a graveyard than change a syllabus. And so much of what is taught is really irrelevant in the modern design office, and there should be new methods, new ways of teaching, and new ideas. And I would hope that one of them would be teaching my approach. But why haven't the academics picked this up? After all, it's been around for 50 years. My textbook was published in 1984 and is still widely available. Why haven't they changed? And I thought about this a lot as I come to the end of my work in this area, and I think the explanation has to do with the nature of change. Why do we change? Why do we do something different? And I think the answer is we do something different if we can rely upon the leadership of the person who's presenting it. When I finished carrying out the tests on the Arab graduates, there was some fluttering in the dovecots. And who is this bloke Bron anyway? Where does he teach? Bristol Polytechnic. And he hasn't even got a first degree. And he's an academic in a department that didn't have a degree in civil engineering. So it's inconceivable that from that source we can be presented with a new, reliable, and we can put our shirts on it. And I think that's part of it. Niels Bohr, the physicist who was one of the proponents of subatomic physics, was asked by a colleague when all the other scientists would accept his views. And he said, when they're all dead. So I might hope that it would happen a bit sooner than that, but I have a feeling I won't see the worldwide adoption of my ideas within my lifetime. But so what? It's been extremely interesting, and it's kept me working. So best luck to all of those who want to follow this new approach to understanding structural behavior. The reason why it's important is that I claim that the ability to solve these problems is the alphabet and grammar of structural modeling. And that is what structural engineers do now. They don't do any analysis or any of that stuff. Most of the actual design of the structural elements is probably carried out by computer software as well. So the one thing they have to get right is the conversion of the real complex three-dimensional structure into a model that they can analyze. And I'm often asked about various models when I'm running the training courses, people who've been working on a job and they're a bit concerned about it. And they show me the model that they've made. And they suddenly realize that you can have a completely incorrect model that is either inappropriate or unsound, and there's absolutely nothing about its adoption that will tell you that it's wrong. And that's why my message to graduates is, don't do something new without discussing it with an experienced engineer, because it's quite easy to end up with the wrong model down a blind alley, and many problems will then ensue. So it's all about structural modeling, and understanding structural behavior is the essential basis of that. And if you don't have that, then unfortunately you will tend to rely on the computer.